My name is Kenny, the host of the Modern Mystic podcast. And today I am so truly jubilant to be having Shauna Shapiro. She's a brilliant author and a best-selling author, professor, clinical psychologist, and internationally recognized expert in mindfulness and self-compassion. She has spent 2 decades studying the benefits of mindfulness and compassion, publishing over 150 papers and 3 critically acclaimed books. Her TED Talk, What You Practice Grows Stronger, has been viewed over 3 million times, and it's so good. So if you haven't heard that or seen that, check that out. So welcome, Shauna, to the Modern Mystic podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I am so looking forward to your answer, which is, what does it mean to you to be a modern mystic?
I think for me, my intention with the scientific research I've been doing for the last few decades has really been to bring some of these spiritual teachings into very accessible tools and practices to really support everybody wherever they are on their spiritual journey.
I love that answer so much because the impetus for this podcast was about making mysticism really practical. And I'm so much about embodiment. And that's part of why I really love your work and wanted to have you on. And so, yeah, you're such a contributor for the listeners who don't know about you yet to the research of the brain and how various mindfulness practices can really bring such wide rates of change to both the body and the brain. And so I just hope that we could start for you to just give a little synopsis. I know in your book you've talked about it. I've seen you in videos, about your life story, but it's so compelling. So I wondered if we could just do like a little synopsis of your journey of how you went from being birthed into this world to being this, critically acclaimed scientist and so passionate about mindfulness.
Yeah, I think my passion really comes from the fact that it saved my life and
Yeah.
that small thing. Um, when I was 17, I had spinal fusion surgery. So
Mm.
I had scoliosis and it had started progressing so much that my spine was going to puncture my lungs. And so we had to operate. And overnight, I went from this healthy, active teenager. I was captain of my volleyball team, and my whole life was volleyball. I had just signed to play at Duke University. And literally overnight, I was, not able to walk, lying in a hospital bed. And I was in the hospital bed for 6 months. I never played volleyball again. And it was devastating. Um, I became really depressed. I thought my life was over. I was in so much pain physically, but also so much pain emotionally.
Yeah.
So many fears about the future. Will I ever walk again? Will I always be in pain? And also so many regrets. Like, I wish I'd done that, or if only I'd done this. And I was really torturing myself. And it was at that time my dad gave me a book. It's called Wherever You Go, There You Are by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. And I remember the opening paragraph. It said, whatever's happened to you, it's already happened. The only thing that matters is now what? And it was as if this path opened up, like, there's hope, there's a future. I don't have to stay stuck. And that really led me on this path. I started reading and studying everything I could about mindfulness. And a few years later, when I had healed enough, I went to Thailand to study at a monastery there. And my experience was so profound that when I came back to the US, I decided to pursue my PhD and become a scientist and study this for the rest of my life. And that's what I've done.
Amazing, amazing how you turned, that experience of such trauma into not only healing, but then offering it as medicine to this world, which is
Mm.
just like the ultimate, I feel like, part of being a modern mystic, right? That modern, how do we then serve? So,
Yeah.
with the expertise of yours, which is neuroplasticity, would you mind speaking about this concept for our audience, how the brain changes in response to our experience and exactly the nuances of how we have the power to change our own brain in doing so, our thought processes?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think it's one of the most important discoveries of the last 400 years of brain science. I think it's definitely the most hopeful scientific discovery because basically up until the 1990s, we thought that our brain was static, that it couldn't change. And this was really depressing. It was like, oh, this is just who I am. I'm stuck. And what neuroplasticity teaches us is that we're never stuck. It's never too late, no matter what mistakes you've made, no matter what your past or what your current circumstances are. All of us have the power and choice to re-architect the very structure of our brain to be healthier, to be happier, to be of greater service. And it's a really hopeful message.
It's amazing. And it's so much about our mind and our thoughts for the listeners, because what you're speaking to is like our literal brain changes. I had Dr. Alyssa Eppel on, and we talked about telomeres and all this. So friends who listen to that episode, go back and check that out. But this is scientifically proven now, like you're saying. And I love how you talk about, what we practice goes stronger. I think you said in your book, Rewire Your Mind, you heard a monk say that to some extent, yes? And that important, truly powerful mantra and affirmation and knowledge that, what we practice. So we can do that internally with our thoughts. So often we think, oh, it's just the yoga or it's just, the outer actions. But it has to do with what we're thinking and the way that we think about things, right?
And that phrase is so important. What you practice grows stronger, because it's both for the good and for the bad. It's something that people really need to keep in mind, that if we're practicing these ruminating thoughts and these negative thoughts constantly, we're carving that pathway. If we're practicing gratitude or appreciation, we're carving that pathway. And one thing I like to be really clear, especially with my patients, because as a clinical psychologist, I work with a lot of people who have a lot of negative thoughts and a lot of hard emotions. And so when I explain neuroplasticity to them and what you practice grows stronger, they're like, oh shit, I don't want to keep practicing my depression, or I don't want to keep practicing my anxiety. And so I want to be really clear with people listening. Bringing your mindful presence to your sadness or to your fear or to your pain is very different. You're practicing a different neural pathway than if you're just hijacked by it. So if you're lost in your ruminations and your depression, yes, you are growing that. But if you're bringing your kindness and your compassion and your mindfulness to, sweetheart, you're in pain right now, you're sad right now, that is practicing something very different, something healthy that you want to grow.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And many of my listeners, because I'm a Tantrika yogi, and I've spoken about this before, but in case certain people haven't heard, listening, in yoga, it's called samskaras, these pathways, these grooves. This is the Sanskrit word. And I love how you're speaking about that, because it's like the yogic text, and a lot of the Buddhist texts, I don't know if you're familiar with these specifically, but talk about how it's like a sword and butter, and you cut the butter and you make this pathway, this groove, and then the milk of consciousness, where does it go? It goes into the groove. And like you're saying so articulately and scientifically, which is so powerful, that when we practice the witness state, right, when we watch our thoughts, this mindfulness practice, oh, this is, and even labeling, this is depression, this is anxiety, and do that, we're literally making another
pathway.
Cut another pathway. So it's, and then the consciousness goes into that pathway.
Yes. And what's so exciting is that there's something called neuronal pruning. So we're pruning these neural pathways. So every time I choose to go on a new pathway, I'm pruning the old pathway, neuronal pruning. So, I mean, it's such an elegant system, and we're designed, to support ourselves in this healing journey.
That is, I'm like legally high right now hearing that word. I've never heard that word, neuronal pruning. That's amazing. And so there's just that continued refinement and elevation when we do the practices. I'd love for you, please, to talk, in your opinion, a little bit more about your understanding and experience of the difference between meditation and mindfulness. I'm a coach and I'm a meditation teacher, and I'm always talking about this with people, and I love your take on this. So could you share with the audience, because I think it's confusing to a lot of people and would be helpful.
So mindfulness and meditation are distinct. Meditation is the practice. It's the exercise. It's the kind of going to the gym and lifting weights so that we can grow our mindfulness. Mindfulness is a way of being. It's a way of being present. It's a way of paying attention. And what I always like to say is attention is your most valuable resource. It's not money. We all know that, but it's not even time. We often think it's time, but if your mind is wandering all the time, it's not really a benefit, no matter how much time you have. So it's really about your attention. Can I be present? And what we've discovered is that on average, this was a study done at Harvard, on average, our minds wander 47% of the time. So that's about half of your life you're missing.
Yeah.
So part of mindfulness is really this mental fitness training, right? That we engage in. And meditation is part of that practice so that we can grow this presence.
That's amazing and so profound. And, when you put it in the statistical terms, it's just like mind blowing, right? How much of our life we're actually missing if we're not practicing the art of paying attention. And I love what you just said about your attention is your greatest currency. And that's so brilliant because even in the practice of your attention, your health improves. So like people
Yes,
often say health is, and it is such a great boon and blessing, but really that's a brilliant thing to say because the attention actually implicates every arena of life, including health. It impacts your relationships and the quality you bring to them, right? In every arena. So, so
absolutely
good.
everywhere. And thank you. This model of mindfulness for me is so important to understand that it's really about our attention. And then it even goes more nuanced. So it's about why are you paying attention and how are you paying attention? So mindfulness then is all three elements, which is your intention. This is why you pay attention, your attention, and your attitude. And so for me, mindfulness is kind of like the co-arising of all three of these ingredients,
Yeah.
which is really knowing why am I paying attention? What do I care about? That's your intention, helps you zero in. And then your attitude is about paying attention with kindness, with curiosity. Because when we pay attention in a judgmental way, it really, judgment and shame, they shut down the learning centers of the brain. So it
Yeah.
really limits us in our ability to, well, obviously to learn, to think clearly, and to heal.
Yeah, that's so profound. And I love what you said because I think that can be really applied to meditation. Like one can sit down because I don't know how you feel and what your experience has been, but me being a coach and I had a yoga studio forever and taught meditation, daily full schedule of meditation classes. And so many people struggle with meditation. And then so many people are like, oh, I just can't meditate, right? They tried. And I
Mhm.
think you're really inspiring delineation of how to think about this in the way of, okay, why am I meditating? Okay, what's my intention? And
Mhm.
etc. So can you talk
Yeah,
about that? How you could actually
yeah,
apply it to the practice of meditation? Because I think that's very
absolutely.
applicable to help people out of the chasm of feeling like they can't meditate or they don't want to meditate.
Yes. And I'm so important that you bring this up because almost everyone I've ever worked with over the last, 2 decades has said, I just can't meditate.
Right, right.
And what I realize is that our definition of meditation is wrong. That meditation is about intentionally bringing your mind to the present moment and then being curious about what happens. And sometimes what happens is your mind wanders. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you have to learn how to bring it back.
Yeah.
And your intention is what really helps you. So intentions are often not fully understood. So your intention, as I said before, helps you zero in on what's important. It helps you really deeply inquire into what do I care about. But our intentions are not just mystical, psychological, vague concepts. Our intentions are neurochemical. When we set an intention, it sets in motion a whole cascade of neurochemistry. When we set an intention, and it has to be something we care about, when we set an intention that we care about, it releases dopamine. Dopamine is the neuromodulator of motivation and learning. Dopamine then turns into acetylcholine, which turns on the learning centers and our attention pathways. Acetylcholine helps us focus our attention. So if I set my intention about something I care about, my body literally creates this chemical cocktail that helps me move in that direction.
That is just amazing and so elucidating to hear about and so validating that,
Mhm.
science has proven now all
Yeah.
of this and just wildly exciting, and there's so many incredible benefits as, you and I have alluded to with the meditation and with the mindfulness practices, such as, reducing levels of stress hormone, cortisol, enhancing immune and cardiovascular function. What are other ones in addition to stress, in addition to better sleep is, I think, one of them, of course.
Absolutely. Some of the research we did at Stanford clearly showed that mindfulness practices are one of the most effective treatments for insomnia. They help you fall asleep faster, sleep more deeply, wake up more refreshed. You also mentioned earlier Dr. Alyssa Eppel's research on telomeres, and I think that's some of the most compelling research showing that mindfulness practice increases telomerase, which is the enzyme that grows our telomeres. So it really is one of the only practices we know that can slow down the process of aging.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you hear the benefits, I mean, I've been meditating since I was 5 years old. You hear the benefits, and I don't know how hearing them, everyone is not running out meditating. You know what I mean? Because that's what everyone's chasing, right? Whether it's I want to look younger, which is obviously on a lot of superficiality, and yet it's very real that the majority of people, right? I want to feel better. I want to sleep better. I want my relationships to be better, right? Mm-hmm. These are all benefits of the meditative and mindfulness practices.
Well, I think one of the things that blocks us is a lack of self-love. I think so many of us don't feel worthy of taking time to care for ourselves. And I think even sometimes when we do approach meditation, it's kind of with like a whip of I need to do this. It's like one more thing on the to-do list. And I don't think it's beneficial when we do it that way. I think meditation, it's really an act of love, and it's an act of love toward ourselves and toward the world. That what the research shows is that people who practice mindfulness and compassion meditation, they are better citizens of the world, right? That these aren't selfish practices. And so to really respect your own self-care and to know that that's the best way you can care for the world.
That's really, really, really important. And I love how you bust a lot of the meditative mindfulness myths, like, oh, it's selfish, or, oh, it's, in your book, you talk about those things, these kind of common misconceptions, if you will. Yeah. So people listening hear that, right? When we take care of ourselves, we can serve the world better. And meditation and mindfulness practices, it's now proven that those individuals doing that are actually actively supporting the world in a more positive way. I love that so much. And you are also speaking to compassion and empathy, for yourself. And you write a lot about those practices. And I feel like in the scientific world, I haven't read everyone, in your field as you have, but I've read a lot. And I feel like your work really stands out in that way, meaning as a scientist, not just Thich Nhat Hanh's work or some of the, well-known Buddhist work that are often integrated into the mindfulness sector. And so could you speak about that, as a scientist, and just that convergence and confluence of those ideas and how they impact our body physiologically and otherwise?
Absolutely. I think it's really important. I think the science, it helps with the actual practice. I love that you said the modern mystic is an embodiment, right? And for us to embody this, we have to understand it. And so, for example, we brought up this idea of thinking self-compassion is selfish, right? And when I can show my patients the research that shows that people who practice self-compassion are rated by their spouses, by their children, by their colleagues as more generous, as more caring, it kind of explodes this idea that it's selfish, right? Or people who say, oh, well, if I'm compassionate with myself, then I'm just going to become like a self-indulgent couch potato, and I'm never going to exercise, and I'm going to eat Oreos all day long. And then I can show them the data, the research that shows that here's a study at UC Berkeley that showed that women who were trying to lose weight were taught self-compassion, and they were much more likely to exercise and to eat healthy than the comparison group, because self-compassion, when you care for yourself, you take care of yourself. So in those ways, the science is helpful. Another way that I think the science is really compelling is, you mentioned empathy versus compassion. And for me, this has been one of the most interesting new discoveries, that at the University of Switzerland, they discovered that empathy and compassion look different in the brain. So when I empathize with someone who's suffering, the pain centers of my brain light up, which makes sense. I see someone stub their toe and I'm like, ooh, ouch, right? And my mirror neurons light up, and I actually, at a subacute level, experience pain. if you imagine that you are always around people who are suffering, if you're a therapist like me or a caregiver, or a healer in some way, you can imagine that's not such good news because at some point you're going to burn out. You can't just kind of subacute firing pain all the time.
Yes.
What was so compelling about this research is that compassion actually lights up the reward and positive centers of the brain. It actually activates the neural circuitry of joy. So when you shift your empathy into compassion, you actually are protecting yourself and better able to serve and help someone else.
That's
That's
amazing.
yeah.
That's blowing my mind. And so many of our listeners are empaths. I
Mm-hmm.
have an episode called, I forget the exact title, but I think it's called Sensitivity is Sexy, HSPs, something. And I go into the differences about these things. And that episode blew up. Like I had thousands of listeners, tons of DMs about that because so many people were
Yeah.
experiencing that. And that is such a helpful point, the difference and the distinguishing between those two chemically even. Wow.
Exactly. And so often, people who are highly sensitive or empathic were told like, well, you have to just not get so involved. You have to not care and you have to detach. And that's what the medical community has done, right? They say, don't be so involved. That doesn't really work. That just costs a lot of energy and also hurts, the people you're with. The actual way to do this is to use the empathy as a signal, transform it into compassion, and then you're in this self-protective suit of goodness, and you're able to serve others. So you're protecting yourself and others. And one of the definitions that I love of compassion, it's Tibetan, and it says compassion is considered incomplete if it doesn't include ourselves. That true compassion always includes yourselves, and that a compassionate act that causes harm to you is not even considered compassionate. It's considered healthy.
Everyone talk about great healthy boundaries and wisdom. With that, what are your top 2 tips to transliterate that though? Like what should people do? Because like I know a lot of people like me who are highly empathetic and highly sensitive are be like, okay, well, how do I do that? Is your mind the panacea meditation? Because then we witness, okay, I'm feeling empathetic. And then in the practicing of the seeing and witnessing, it transliterates into compassion.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that?
Great question. Right. It's very easy in theory. It's a little harder to put in practice. I will say I spend actually whole courses at the university training the therapists who are in my graduate program in these practices. So I just want to be clear that this isn't something you're just going to like walk away from. But so the first step, just like you said, is naming the emotion that you're feeling, right? To just name, I'm afraid, or I am feeling the pain of this person, or whatever it is. So it's called name it to tame it. When you name an emotion, it actually calms down your physiology. That this was a study at UCLA. They showed that when you name your emotion, it calms you down. So just like you said, the first step is just to know I'm in pain, right? Then what you want to do is instead of focusing on the pain that the other person is experiencing or that you're experiencing, you focus on your love, your care. So let's take, for example, my son. Okay, I'll give you a simple example. He was really, really struggling at one point, and when as a mother, when you hear your son struggling, right, it just crushes you, right? The empathy is very strong.
Totally.
So I am feeling his sadness, his loneliness, his depression, and I am feeling the pain. And instead of staying there, I take a breath and I think about how much I love him. The reason I'm in pain is because I want this boy to be happy and I want him to be healthy and to feel safe and loved. And instead of focusing on the pain, I start sending my compassion. May you be peaceful. May your pain pass. May you trust your good heart. And as I'm sending compassion, I'm feeling more empowered. I'm feeling my energy rise up. Okay. So empathy lets us know there's a problem, but we need to use it as a gateway to compassion.
That's so good. And so people, you could practice doing what Shauna's saying, like come up with 2 or 3 phrases.
Yeah.
For people who haven't done this practice before, because there are going to be some experts who have been, meditating for 30 years listening and some people who are very new. So you could come out perhaps with a practice like, may so-and-so feel supported. May so-and-so feel loved. May so-and-so feel free. and you write that in your phone so that when you get triggered, you can
You
just
have it
right.
handy.
You've got it. If you're not an expert like you
So you're
are in
making
this.
a really good point, is that when you get triggered, right, you go into trauma response, you can't think of those phrases. You're just holding on. So it's really important to have them written down, like you said. And in fact, one of the chapters in my book in Good Morning, I Love You,
Love that.
and also in Rewire Your Mind, because they're the same book, they just have different titles. But one of the chapters really goes into empathy versus compassion, and then has the practice written down with different phrases that you can use. And a lot of people said, I also have it on Audible, and they said they like it better because then they can actually hear me saying it to them. They don't have to be reading it while they're practicing.
Yeah, beautiful. So for the listeners, because I always close out every guest I have with an offering, with a benediction, with a meditation. And I know at some point soon you have to go. So would you mind, in your beautiful voice, because you have a very soothing voice, so I'm not surprised everyone asked you about that. Would you mind making that your offering? Like, that, what would people say? What were things that people then could listen, and people will rewind this and listen to you, because I always have people do that.
Absolutely. And there, I'll also send you a link on my website where they can download the loving kindness meditation and mindfulness practices that are professionally recorded, but for the on the spot, in the moment. So the invitation first is, place your hand on your heart and just name the emotion you're feeling. So fear, sadness, overwhelm, whatever it is. Feel your breath. We're not pushing it away. We're not getting rid of it. And then choosing to refocus our attention on what our caring heart wishes for this person who's suffering. So may their suffering pass. I care about your suffering. I'm with you. I care about you. May you be safe and protected. And just feel your good heart, your caring. So instead of focusing on their pain, we focus on our love for this person. And our love is what protects us and is able to serve them. So take one more breath in and out. You can put your hand back in your lap. You can let your eyes open if they were closed.
Thank you. That was really, really exquisite and really empowering. And I just had this incredible aha moment, because I've heard so many different amazing, meditators, realized beings, quote unquote. You read spiritual autobiographies, etc., of these wonderful, wise beings who talk about how blessing people, how really offering blessings to people makes a difference. And that's a real practice. And when I've shared that with different people, some people receive that and are like, well, what do you mean? Or it doesn't really help. And I understand that skepticism. And you right now, how you just described it in that practice, really crystallized that concept. Blessing may not be the word that some of the listeners will want to use, but you just literally put that in such practical terms, and that's what you're doing. And I felt my physiology change.
Exactly. At the very least, it's helping you, right?
Yeah, right.
But at the very least, it's changing your physiology. And what I always ask people is, who are you when you're sending love versus who are you when you're worrying and in fear? You're a different person. And so if we're taking care of my mental health first, because again, the definition of compassion is it has to always include myself. That is the heart, is I have to come from a place of peace.
Yes. And even the words that you shared, listeners, try them on yourself, because that's, I started to do halfway through. I thought, oh my gosh, for myself, this is also an amazing practice. So just to encompass that other really poignant and profound teaching about taking care of yourself, people can listen and use it on themselves. How
I start with yourself and then go to someone else.
I love that.
In the book, I have 2 whole chapters on self-compassion before we ever get to compassion and empathy for other people, and really learning how to acknowledge your own pain and then bring care to your pain, compassion to your pain.
I love that. Well, that word compassion, I think it means like with calm, obviously passion. Yeah. And it's just so important to have passion for yourself, for your life, for your practices. And so I love that, because sometimes I feel like the word compassion, the meditative and mindfulness groups get like there's a feeling that's beautiful, but a very kind of almost like passive. But then I
Right.
always like remind people,
Right.
no, it has passion in it, the word passion. And you really embody that. So I love that so much. Well, where else can folks find out about your work? You have a new book. Yeah.
I have a new book. In fact, I have a copy here. I don't think people can see this because it's audio, but I'll show you because it's so cute.
We just got it up on YouTube recently. So our YouTube watchers or go to YouTube. It's Modern Mystic Mindful Movement.
It's called Good Morning, I Love You, Violet. And so here's what's interesting. I've always worked with adults. I'm a clinical psychologist, and all of my research has been with adults. However, as I started going down the rabbit hole of neuroplasticity and learning about the way the child's brain develops and how sponge-like and just plastic it is, it's really extraordinary. In fact, the first 7 years of a child's life, they're in a theta brain state, which means they're basically hypnotizable.
That's unbelievable. Theta.
And so what I realized was, why aren't we imprinting these resources of mindfulness and self-compassion that will serve them for the rest of their lives?
Yes.
And so I created this beautiful children's book with an amazing illustrator, Shauna Shapiro. And it's really a way to teach self-compassion to children in this kind of fun, spunky, colorful way. So I'm so excited about it. I've actually never been more excited about another project, talk about passion, because I think this really has a possibility of impacting at such a bigger scale. So
such a bigger scale. And I feel like, in my generation and our generation, now we've got all these people who, like myself, have been practicing perhaps from when they were young. And if not, which is more unusual, I think still, but many of them have practiced as adults. So they all have kids and then grandkids at some point soon, right? And so this is the new earth, right? To birth. Yes. And that's really, really so exciting. Congratulations. The cover looks really, really fun and sweet.
It's beautiful. And I hope everyone goes out and gets it for a gift for someone, anywhere. That's the beauty of it. I told my friends who all their kids are older, I'm like, well, then buy one and give it to the library or give it to a school or children's hospital. Like it's such a colorful, fun gift. So I'm really loving it.
That's a great idea. And for those listeners in time and space, the holidays are coming up, believe it or not. So there'll be friends who are listening in real time. Get the book, offer it, and it's a really big gift that you can give when you share it with. I will
say, anyone who can't afford it, you can send me an email to my website that we've raised a lot of money to be donating it. So we're donating books to underserved communities, to children's hospitals, to libraries. So please, I want really everyone to have this book.
That's so amazing and so compassion in action. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, definitely email Shauna. And my members are getting her free loving kindness meditation. So all of you monthly Mystic members, you can go to modernmystic.love if you're not a member, and you can get many gifts from my extraordinary guests, including Shauna Shapiro's beautiful, beautiful meditation. I can't wait to check that out. So thank you for that.
You're so welcome. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a joy.
Well, thank you for looming and threading together such profound ancient wisdom with your scientific research. Your practices and insight are just illuminative and really, really changing lives. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.